She was used to pay a debt, and it changed her life forever. 10 years ago, Neeve Ballard stood beside a carriage and watched her future disappear. She was 16 years old. There was a debt, older than she was, older than most of the people who had gathered to see her go. Years before she was born, her father's life had been saved by an alpha whose lands lay far from their own. The debt was never spoken of again. No payment was requested. No obligation was enforced. Until one day it was. The alpha who came to collect did not speak of kindness. He spoke of what was owed. He had traveled far, he said, and he had not traveled far to leave without what belonged to him. Her father nodded. The council nodded. And Neeve understood for the first time that she had always been part of a transaction she never knew existed. Nobody asked her what she wanted. She stood beside that carriage, and she waited. She waited for her father to change his mind. He didn't. She waited for someone in her pack to speak. Nobody did. And she waited for the boy she trusted most. The one who had once told her, in the way that young people say things they mean completely, that he would always find her. He never came. The carriage left before noon. Neeve watched the only world she had ever known disappear behind the tree line, and she made herself a promise. She would not wait again. Not for anyone. Not for him. For 10 years she kept that promise. This is the story of what happened when Aldric Morth finally found her. Chapter 1. The territory of Caldenmore sat at the edge of the known world. That was not an exaggeration. It was simply geography. The mountains that surrounded it on 3 sides were not impassable, but they were close. For 4 months of the year, the main passage closed entirely. Snow filled the gaps between the rocks until the path disappeared, and the territory became, for all practical purposes, unreachable. Traders knew this. Travelers knew this. Anyone who had ever tried to arrive after the first frost knew this. It was, Neeve had come to understand, one of the reasons she had stayed. Not the only reason, but one of them. She had arrived at 16, with nothing but a small trunk, and the particular silence of someone who has decided, very recently, to stop crying. The Alpha of Caldenmore, an older man, precise and unsentimental, had placed her in his household without ceremony. There was work to be done. She did it. There were expectations to be met. She met them. Over time, the work became competence, and the competence became reputation, and the reputation became something she had not expected. Respect. It had taken years, but it was hers. Entirely hers. Nobody had given it to her. She had built it quietly, the way people build things when they have nothing else to do with their hands. She managed the Alpha's records now, the correspondence, the territorial agreements that arrived by messenger in the warmer months and required careful, precise responses. She sat in council meetings, and her opinion was asked and occasionally followed. The older women who had watched her arrive as a frightened girl now greeted her by name with something close to warmth. It was a life. Not the life she would have chosen. But it was hers. Eden had become part of it 3 years ago, in the gradual way that things become part of a life when you are not paying close attention. He was kind. He was steady. He worked the eastern grounds and had a laugh that filled whatever room he was in. He had looked at her one afternoon across the council hall and smiled. Not with intention, not with strategy, simply because she was there, and he was glad of it. She had not expected to be moved by something so simple. She had not expected to stay moved, but she had let him in, carefully and slowly, the way she let most things in now, with one hand always slightly raised, ready to close the door if she needed to. He had never given her reason to close it, and so it had stayed open. It was enough, she told herself. Most days she believed it. She was standing at the window of the records hall when the messenger arrived. Late afternoon light fell across the stone floor in long, pale strips. Outside, the first suggestion of autumn was beginning to show in the trees. A warning, as it always was, that the passage would close again soon. The messenger was young and tired and had clearly ridden hard. He handed the letter to the Alpha's aide without a word and accepted water with both hands. Neeve watched from across the room. She did not know why she watched. She processed dozens of messages in a given week. Most of them were trade agreements or territorial updates or requests that required a polite, measured response and nothing more. But something made her watch this one. The aide read the letter. Then he read it again. Then he looked up and found Neeve across the room with an expression she could not immediately name. "The Alpha will want to see you," he said. She set down her pen. "When?" she asked. "Now," he said. Outside, the trees moved in the autumn wind. The light was already beginning to go. Neeve straightened her papers, stood and walked toward the door. She did not know, in that moment, that the passage would close in 6 weeks. She did not know that someone had been riding toward Caldenmore for longer than 6 weeks. She did not know that the life she had built so carefully, so quietly, so entirely on her own terms, was about to be asked a question it had never needed to answer before. She simply walked toward the door, and the story began. The Alpha of Caldenmore was not a man who summoned people without reason. Neeve had worked closely enough with him over the years to know this. He was precise in his language and economical with his time. When he called someone to his study, it was because something required their specific attention and nothing else would do. She knocked once and entered. He was standing at the window, the same window he always stood at when something required thought, with a letter in his hand. He turned when she entered. He looked at her for a moment, in the way that people look at someone when they are deciding how much to say. "We have a visitor arriving tomorrow," he said, "from the Eastern Territories." Neeve waited. "He has been traveling for some time," the Alpha continued. "The journey was not simple. He will be received with full courtesy." He paused. "I wanted you to know before the household did." She looked at him carefully. In 10 years, she had learned to read the spaces between his words. There was something in this one, something he was not saying, that made the back of her neck feel strange. "Who is he?" she asked. The Alpha set the letter down on his desk. He did not look away from her. "Aldric Morth," he said, "Alpha King of the Eastern Territories." The room did not change. The light did not change. The sound of the wind outside the window did not change. But something shifted inside Neeve's chest. Something old and locked and very carefully placed. And for one unguarded moment, she felt 16 years old again, standing beside a carriage, waiting for someone who never came. She breathed. "I see," she said. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. The Alpha watched her with the particular stillness of a man who knows more than he is saying, and has decided, for now, to say nothing further. "I trust you will manage the correspondence for his stay," he said, "as you do for all official visitors." "Of course," Neeve said. She left the study. She walked back down the corridor toward the records hall. She sat down at her desk. She picked up her pen. She did not write anything for a long time. He arrived the following afternoon. Neeve was in the courtyard when the horses came through the gate. Not because she had planned to be there, she told herself, but because the Eastern correspondence required a signature from the Alpha's aide, and the aide had been in the courtyard, and it had simply been practical to go there herself. She told herself this clearly, and did not examine it further. There were 4 riders. 3 of them were guards, broad, road-worn, moving with the particular economy of men who had been in the saddle for weeks. The 4th rode slightly ahead. She knew him before she could stop herself from knowing him. 10 years had changed him. Of course they had. The boy she remembered had become something larger, more contained, more deliberate in the way he occupied space. He sat on his horse the way men sit when they have forgotten that they could sit any other way. as though the weight of everything he carried had simply become part of his posture. But the line of his jaw was the same, and when he dismounted and his eyes moved across the courtyard, the way eyes move when they are looking for something specific, and found her, Neeve felt something she had not felt in 10 years. She felt found. It lasted perhaps half a second. Then she looked down at the papers in her hand and reminded herself, quietly and precisely, that she was 26 years old and had not waited for this man in a very long time. When she looked up again, his eyes were still on her. She held his gaze for exactly as long as courtesy required. Then she turned and walked back toward the records hall with the correspondence still unsigned in her hand. Behind her, she heard the courtyard continue its ordinary business. Hooves on stone, voices exchanging greetings, the Alpha's aide welcoming the visitors with the formal language of territorial protocol. She did not look back, but her hand, she noticed, was not entirely steady. She pressed it flat against the papers and kept walking. That evening, Eden found her at the window of their shared quarters, looking out at nothing in particular. "You heard about the visitor," he said. It was not a question. "I managed the correspondence for his arrival," she said. "It's part of my work." Eden was quiet for a moment. He had a gift for quiet, for sitting inside a silence without needing to fill it. It was one of the things she had come to rely on. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Of course," she said. He crossed the room and stood beside her. He did not touch her. He simply stood there, looking out at the same dark nothing she was looking at. And after a moment she felt the familiar steadiness of him settle around her like something warm. It was enough, she told herself. She almost believed it. She had expected him to say something. That was the thing she had not anticipated. Not his arrival, not the way her hand had trembled against the papers, not even the half-second in the courtyard that she had spent the rest of the evening trying to unfeel. What she had not anticipated was the silence. Aldric Morth did not seek her out. He did not request a private audience. He did not send word through the Alpha's aide that he wished to speak with her. He did not corner her in a corridor or appear at the door of the records hall with the particular expression of a man who has traveled a very long way and intends to make use of the arrival. He simply appeared in the places she already was. The morning council meeting. The Eastern Hall where territorial correspondence was reviewed. The long table where the Alpha's senior staff took their midday meal. He was simply there, present, quiet, occupying his chair with the same contained deliberateness she had noticed in the courtyard. And he made no more claim on her attention than any other visitor would have made. This, she found, was significantly more difficult to manage than a confrontation would have been. A confrontation she knew how to handle. She had prepared for it, in the abstract, for 10 years. The things she would say, the way she would say them, the particular quality of calm she would maintain while saying them. She had the whole architecture of it ready, somewhere in the back of her mind, waiting to be used. Presence she had not prepared for. On the second morning, he asked her a question about the territorial water agreements, something specific, something that required genuine knowledge of Caldenmoor's history with the neighboring lowland packs. She answered him, precisely, and without warmth. He listened without interruption, nodded once, and thanked her in the measured way of someone who genuinely means it. That was all. On the third morning, he was already at the long table when she arrived. He looked up when she entered. He did not smile. He simply looked, the way he had looked in the courtyard, with that particular quality of attention that she could not decide whether to call focus or recognition, and then returned to the documents in front of him. She sat at the opposite end of the table. She was aware of him the entire time. She hated that she was aware of him the entire time. Eden noticed. He did not say so directly. That was not his way. But on the third evening, she caught him watching her across the dinner table with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not suspicion, not jealousy. something quieter and more careful than either of those things. She met his eyes, and he looked away first and smiled at something one of the other men at the table said, and the moment passed. But it had been there. On the fourth day, it rained. The kind of rain that Caldenmore produced in autumn, heavy and purposeful, filling the mountain passes with sound and turning the courtyard to mud. Most of the outdoor work stopped. The hall filled with people who had nowhere else to be. Neeve was at her desk when she became aware that someone had stopped in the doorway of the records hall. She did not look up immediately. She finished the line she was writing. Then she looked up. Aldric stood in the doorway with rain on his shoulders and the particular expression of a man who has stopped somewhere without being entirely sure why he stopped there. They looked at each other. "I did not mean to interrupt," he said. "You haven't," she said. He did not leave. He looked at the shelves along the wall, the years of records she had organized and maintained, the careful architecture of a decade's worth of territorial history, and something moved across his face that she could not name. "You built this," he said. It was not quite a question. "Over time," she said. He nodded slowly. He looked at the shelves for another moment. Then he looked back at her, and there it was again, that quality of attention that she could not deflect the way she could deflect words. "I won't keep you," he said. He left. Neeve looked at the door for a long moment after he had gone. Then she looked down at the line she had been writing. She had no memory of what it said. On the fifth day, the rain stopped. The courtyard filled again with the ordinary sounds of the territory. Horses, voices, the particular rhythm of a place that knows winter is coming and has work to do before it arrives. Neeve returned to her regular pattern. Morning records, midday council, afternoon correspondence. The clean, predictable architecture of a day that asked nothing unexpected of her. It almost worked. Almost. Because Aldric Morth was still there. Still present at the long table. Still asking precise questions about territorial history that required precise answers. Still looking at her with that quality of attention she had not found a way to deflect. She had begun to suspect that deflection was not, in fact, available to her. She did not examine this suspicion closely. It happened in the afternoon. The Alpha had called a small meeting, herself, his aide, and Aldric, to review the terms of a water agreement that touched the eastern borders. It was routine work. The kind of meeting that required attention but not much else. Neeve had prepared the relevant documents the night before, and set them on the table in the order they would be needed. She was reaching for the third document when Aldric's hand stopped. Not toward her, simply stopped. And he looked at the small bunch of dried herbs she kept at the corner of her desk. A habit she had developed years ago. Dried valerian and something local to Caldenmore that the older women had taught her to use. She barely noticed it anymore. He noticed it. "You still keep valerian nearby," he said. It was said quietly, not to the room, to her. Neeve looked up. "For concentration," she said carefully. "It helps with long hours at the desk." "I know," he said. "You used to keep a sprig of it tucked into your sleeve during the autumn record reviews. You said the smell helped you think." The room continued around them. The Alpha's aide was reviewing a document. The fire was doing what fires do. Nothing had changed. But something had moved inside Neve's chest. Something small and precise, like a key turning in a lock she had forgotten was there. She looked at him. He was not performing the memory. He was not watching her face to see what the memory did to her. He had simply said it, the way people say things that have been true for so long they no longer notice them, and returned his attention to the documents in front of him. She thought, "You remember that. Not, you remember me." That. A sprig of valerian tucked into a sleeve. A habit from a girl of 15 or 16 who sat through long record reviews and needed something to help her concentrate. Something so small and so specific and so entirely without political value that there was no reason. No strategic reason, no calculated reason, no reason at all to carry it across 10 years. Unless it had simply stayed. She looked back down at her documents. The meeting continued. She answered the questions that were asked of her. She found the relevant passages. She confirmed the dates. She did everything that was required of her, and she did it without error. But for the rest of the afternoon, she was aware of a question sitting at the back of her mind that had not been there before. She did not want the question. She had been very careful, for a very long time, not to have questions like this one. That evening, she found Eden at the edge of the eastern grounds, checking the fencing before the first hard frost made the work impossible. She stood beside him for a while without speaking. He worked with the quiet efficiency she had always found steadying, hands that knew what they were doing. No wasted movement, no performance. "You're thinking," he said without looking up. "I'm always thinking," she said. "You're thinking about him," he said. It was said without accusation, without sharpness, in exactly the same tone he used to say everything else, even and present, and entirely without pretense. Neeve was quiet for a moment. "He remembered something," she said finally. "Something small. Something that doesn't matter." Eden straightened. He looked at her with the expression she had seen at the dinner table 3 nights ago. That quiet, careful thing that was not jealousy and not suspicion, but something she still did not have a word for. "Small things are what people keep," he said, "when they don't have anything else to hold on to." He returned to the fencing. Neeve stood in the cold and looked at nothing and understood, with a clarity she did not particularly want, that Eden had just said something true. She stayed until the light was gone. Then she walked back to the hall alone. She lasted 6 more days. 6 days of council meetings and correspondence, and the ordinary rhythm of Caldenmore going about its business with an alpha king at its table. 6 days of valerian on her desk, and questions she did not ask, and a man who continued, with infuriating consistency, to simply be present without demanding anything of her. On the 7th day, she found him alone. It was early, earlier than the household usually stirred, and he was in the eastern corridor that led to the outer records room, standing at the narrow window that looked out over the mountain passage. The light was gray and thin. He had not heard her approach. She stopped. She had told herself, walking there, that she did not know what she was going to say. That was not entirely true. She had known for 6 days what she was going to say. She had simply been waiting for the moment when not saying it became more unbearable than saying it. That moment, apparently, was now. "You should not have come," she said. He turned. He did not look surprised to see her. He did not look surprised by what she had said. "I know," he said. "Then why did you?" He looked at her for a moment. Outside, the wind moved through the passage with the particular sound it made in autumn, low and purposeful, like something that has already decided where it is going. "Because I have been trying to get here for 10 years, he said, "and I finally did." The words landed somewhere in the middle of her chest, and she felt the familiar architecture of her anger rising to meet them, clean and reliable, and built from a decade of certainty. "You didn't come," she said. "That is what happened. Whatever you are telling yourself now, you didn't come. I stood beside that carriage and I waited and you did not come." "I know," he said again. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't agree with me like it costs you nothing. I was 16 years old. I waited for you, and you were not there." Something moved across his face. Not defense, not explanation. Something older and heavier than either of those things. "No," he said quietly. "I wasn't." "Then we have nothing to..." I was there the next morning. She stopped. I argued that night, he said, with my father, with the council, with every person who had agreed to let you go without consulting me. I was not alpha yet. Nobody was required to listen, and they didn't. He paused. By the time I reached the road the following morning, the carriage was already half a day ahead of me. I followed it for 3 days before I was brought back by force. Neeve said nothing. After that, I looked through official channels, he said. Pack registries, travel documents, territorial records. Your name appeared once, a transfer record from your father's pack to a receiving household, and then it disappeared. Caldon does not appear in the Eastern registries. The passage closes for 4 months of the year. Any record that might have led here was either incomplete, or misfiled, or simply never entered. He reached inside his coat. He placed a journal on the narrow ledge of the window. Then another. Then a folded collection of papers held together with a leather cord, worn at the edges, handled many times. 10 years, he said. Every lead I could find, every territory I wrote to, every registry I searched, every name that might have been connected to yours. Neeve looked at the journals. She did not move toward them. Pick one up, he said. Not a command, something quieter than that. She crossed the corridor. She picked up the journal closest to her. She opened it. His handwriting. Dense and precise. Dates going back 9 years. Names of territories. Names of pack administrators. Names crossed out. Routes marked and then abandoned. Pages and pages of a search conducted in the methodical way of someone who refuses to stop and does not know how. Her name appeared on almost every page. She turned the pages slowly. She did not read every word. She did not need to. The volume of it was enough. The sheer accumulated weight of years spent looking for something that the world had made very difficult to find. Her throat tightened. She closed the journal. She set it back on the ledge carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady, and she looked out the narrow window at the mountain passage and the gray morning light, and she did not say anything for a long time. You came too late, she said finally. Her voice was even. She was proud of that. I know, he said. I have a life here. I know that too. Then what do you want from me? He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the particular weight of someone who has thought very carefully about a question and decided to answer it honestly regardless of what honesty costs. Nothing, he said. I don't want anything from you. I came because I needed you to know that you were not forgotten. That is all. What you do with that is yours. Neeve looked at the journals on the ledge. 10 years of her name in someone else's handwriting. She had spent a decade building a life on a single certainty. That nobody had come. That nobody had chosen her. That the waiting had been for nothing. And the lesson was simply not to wait again. The journals did not undo the decade. They did not undo the carriage or the silence or the years of Caldon winters, or Eden's steady presence beside her, or any of the 10,000 ordinary moments that had accumulated into something she called her life. But they unmade the certainty. And without the certainty, she did not entirely know what was left. She straightened. She looked at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time since he had arrived. And for one unguarded moment she saw not the Alpha King who had come too late, but the boy who had followed a carriage for 3 days before being dragged back by force. She did not say what she saw. She picked up her journals and walked back toward the records hall. At the end of the corridor, she stopped. She did not turn around. The passage closes in 4 weeks, she said. A pause. I know, he said. She walked on. Behind her, the gray morning light fell across the journals still sitting on the ledge, and the wind moved through the mountain passage, and the story that Neeve Ballard had told herself for 10 years quietly began to come apart at the edges. She went back to work. That was what she knew how to do. When Caldenmore had been strange and cold and entirely unfamiliar, she had gone to work. When the winters had been long, and the passage had closed, and the territory had felt like the edges of the world, she had gone to work. Work had always been the architecture that held everything else in place. She sat at her desk. She opened the correspondence. She read the same sentence 4 times. The journals were not there anymore. She had not taken them. She did not know if Aldric had collected them, or if someone else had. They were simply gone from the ledge by the time she passed the corridor again, and she told herself she was glad of it. She was not entirely glad of it. That was the problem. She knew what the journals contained now. She could not unknow it. Every time she reached for a document or confirmed a date or reviewed a territorial agreement, the pages were there at the back of her mind, dense and precise and 10 years deep, and she could not find the angle from which they stopped mattering. She had been so certain. For 10 years, the certainty had been the one thing that did not move. Everything else had shifted and adjusted and accumulated and changed. The territory, the work, the seasons, Eden, the slow accretion of a life she had not chosen but had learned to inhabit. But underneath all of it, the certainty had stayed fixed. Nobody came. She had built everything on top of that. And now she sat at her desk in the records hall she had organized with her own hands over the course of a decade, surrounded by the evidence of everything she had made of herself in this place, and she could not find the certainty anymore. It was not that she forgave him. She did not know yet what she felt about the journals, or the 3 days or the years of her name in someone else's handwriting. Those things were too large and too recent to be anything other than raw. But the story she had told herself, the clean, simple, load-bearing story of a girl who was abandoned and a boy who did not come, that story no longer held its shape. And a story that no longer holds its shape is very difficult to live inside. She saw Aldric at the midday meal. He was at the far end of the table, speaking with the Alpha's aide about something administrative. He did not look at her when she sat down. She did not look at him. She was aware of him the entire time. Eden sat beside her. He passed her the bread without being asked. He always knew before she reached for it. And she thanked him and ate and said the right things to the right people, and performed the ordinary rhythms of the meal with the competence of someone who has done it 1,000 times. Eden did not say anything, but twice she felt his eyes on her. Not with accusation, not with the sharpness of someone looking for confirmation of a fear, simply with attention. The same steady attention he had always given her, the kind that did not demand anything in return and had never needed to. She had always found that attention steadying. Today it made her feel the weight of what she could not say. In the afternoon, she walked to the eastern grounds. She did not know why she went there. The work did not require it. But the records hall had begun to feel too small, and the corridor with the narrow window had begun to feel too present, and she needed air that did not carry the particular quality of things left unresolved. The grounds were quiet. The last of the autumn work was nearly done. The fencing checked, the stores counted, the territory making its final preparations before winter closed everything down. In 4 weeks, the passage would be impassable. The territory would turn inward. Whatever had not been resolved by then would have to wait until spring. She stood at the edge of the eastern field and looked at the mountains. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was Eden. He stood beside her. He looked at the mountains too. For a while, neither of them said anything, and the silence between them had the particular quality of a silence that has been waiting a long time to become a conversation. "You haven't slept," he said finally. "I've slept," she said. "Not well." She didn't answer. Eden was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, not cautious, not afraid, simply careful, in the way of someone who is about to say something true and wants to say it correctly. "Neeve," he said. "What did he tell you?" She looked at the mountains. "That he looked for me," she said. "For 10 years. He has records, Journals, dates, and territories and names. She paused. He followed the carriage for 3 days before they brought him back. Eden received this without sound. "Do you believe him?" he asked. She thought about the journals, the worn edges of the leather cord, the density of the handwriting, the particular quality of something that has been handled many times over many years. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think I do." Eden nodded slowly. The wind came down off the mountains with the cold in it. That meant the season was turning. Neeve wrapped her arms around herself and stood in it, and waited for something. She did not know what, to settle. "I built everything on the idea that nobody came," she said. It was not quite said to him. It was said to the mountains, or to the air, or to no one in particular. "I made a life out of that. She stopped. She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Eden stood beside her in the cold, and he did not say anything for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and even, and carried the weight of a man who has understood something and is not yet ready to say it completely. "I know," he said. 2 words, but the way he said them told her that he was not talking only about the journals. She looked at him. He was looking at the mountains. His profile was familiar to her. The line of it, the steadiness of it, the particular way he held himself in difficult weather. She had looked at this face for 3 years. She knew it the way you know things you have chosen to keep close. She looked at it now and felt, alongside everything else, the specific grief of understanding that kindness is not always enough. He knew that too. That was the worst part. She looked back at the mountains. The passage would close in 4 weeks. Whatever this was, whatever it was becoming, it would have to become it before then. She stayed until the cold drove her inside. Eden stayed beside her the whole time and did not ask for anything. And that was the thing she would remember longest about that afternoon. She found him that evening, not in the eastern grounds, not at the long table. In their quarters, sitting by the small window with a cup of something warm that had long since gone cold, looking out at the dark in the particular way of someone who has been sitting with a thought for long enough that the thought has become a decision. She closed the door behind her. He did not turn around immediately. When he did, his face had the quality she had seen building for days, that careful, quiet thing that was not jealousy and not accusation, and that she now understood was simply the face of a man who has been paying attention. "Eden," she said. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly. She sat. He looked at her for a moment, then he looked back at the window. "I've been trying to find the right way to say this," he said. "I don't think there is one. So I'm going to say it plainly." She waited. "I knew," he said. "Not at first. At first I thought it was just history. Something that happened to you a long time ago that still had edges. Everyone has those. I wasn't worried about a ghost." He paused. "But he's not a ghost." "Eden, I'm not finished," he said, quietly, without sharpness. She closed her mouth. "I've been watching you for 10 days, he said. "And I've been watching you for 3 years. And I know the difference." He turned from the window and looked at her directly. Not with anger, not with the performance of dignity, simply with the steady honesty that had always been the most essential thing about him. "You've never looked at me the way you looked at him in that courtyard. Not once. In 3 years. The words landed without cruelty. That was almost worse. "That's not..." she started. "Don't," he said. "Please. I'm not saying it to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's true, and we both know it's true, and I think you've been trying to find a way to tell me something that I've already understood." Neeve looked at her hands. "I care about you," she said. "That is real." "I know it is," he said. "I never doubted that." He set down the cold cup. But caring about someone and choosing someone are different things. You know that. You've known it for longer than 10 days. She did not answer. Because he was right. She had known it before Aldric arrived. Had known it in the way you know things you have decided not to examine. Things you keep in the peripheral vision of your life because looking at them directly would require a conversation you are not ready to have. She had cared for Eden genuinely. She had been grateful for him genuinely. She had built something real with him, inside the limits of what she had been able to give. But she had never given him everything. And he had known. He had known, and he had stayed, and he had been steady and present, and entirely without complaint. And that, she understood now, had been its own kind of suffering that she had not let herself see clearly enough. I kept hoping, he said. His voice was quieter now. That one day something would shift. That you'd come home one evening and just be here. Fully. Not most of the way. He looked at the window again. I told myself it was enough. For a while I believed it. Eden, I'm not angry with you, he said. I want you to know that. I'm not angry and I don't blame you, and I don't need an apology. He paused. But I can't keep being the thing you settled into because the thing you were waiting for never came. That's not... I can't be that. The fire had burned low. The room was cold at the edges and warm in the middle and entirely, completely still. Neeve felt something break open in her chest. Not the sharp break of the courtyard or the corridor or the journals, but something slower and more final. Like ice at the end of winter giving way, not all at once, but in the particular patient way of something that has held as long as it could. I'm sorry, she said. I know, he said. They sat in silence for a while. Not the comfortable silence she had come to rely on. Something different. The silence of two people who have said the true thing and are now living in the space it left behind. After a while, he stood. He moved toward the door with the quiet efficiency that had always been his. No wasted movement, no performance. He stopped with his hand on the door. He looked for you, Eden said. Not a question. Yes, she said. He nodded once. He did not turn around. Then stop making him pay for finding you, he said. He left. Neeve sat in the cold room beside the dying fire and did not move for a long time. Outside, the wind came down from the mountains. 3 weeks until the passage closed. She did not sleep. She sat beside the dying fire until it was only embers, and then she sat in the dark. And at some point, the dark began to lighten at the edges, and she understood that morning had arrived without her noticing. She stood. She washed her face. She put on her coat. She did these things with the particular calm of someone who has finished deciding and is now simply moving in the direction of the decision. She knew where he would be. He was in the eastern corridor, the narrow window, the gray morning light, the mountains visible beyond the glass with the first suggestion of snow on the highest peaks. A warning, as everything in Caldenmore was a warning, that time was running out. He heard her this time. He turned before she reached him, and when he saw her face, he went very still. The particular stillness of someone who is reading something carefully and does not want to misread it. She stopped a few feet from him. She looked at him in the gray morning light. The line of his jaw, the weight he carried in his shoulders, the eyes that had found her in the courtyard on the first day, and had not looked at her with anything other than honesty since. She thought about the carriage. She thought about the journals. She thought about Eden's hand on the door and his voice saying, "Stop making him pay for finding you." She thought about 16 years old and a promise made in the way that young people make promises. Completely, without strategy, without knowing yet how much the world charges for that kind of certainty. She thought about 10 years of building a life on a story that was not entirely true. She did not say any of this. There was nothing left to say. She took one step forward. He extended his hand. Not as an alpha, not as a king, not as a man presenting terms or making claims, or asking to be forgiven. Simply a hand, open, offered. The hand of someone who has waited long enough to know that waiting is all he has left to offer and is offering it anyway. She looked at it. The fire that had never quite gone out in her chest, the one she had spent 10 years calling anger, and before that called something else entirely, recognized what this was. She looked up at his face. He was watching her with the expression of a man who has crossed a very long distance and arrived at the edge of something he cannot cross for her. Whatever happened next was hers. It had always been hers. That was the only thing she understood now, that had ever been entirely hers. The choice. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, carefully, the way you hold something you have looked for long enough to know the cost of dropping it. And for a long moment, neither of them moved. Outside, the wind came through the mountain passage. The snow on the highest peaks caught the morning light and held it. Neeve stood in the eastern corridor of a territory she had not chosen, in a life she had not chosen, holding the hand of the one thing in it that she was, finally, choosing herself. It was enough. This time she believed it completely. The snow came 3 days later, not the heavy snow of deep winter, that was still weeks away, but the first snow, the warning snow, the kind that dusts the highest peaks and reminds the territory that the passage will not stay open much longer. Neeve stood in the courtyard with 2 horses and a small trunk, the same size trunk she had arrived with 10 years ago. She had not planned that. It had simply worked out that way. The Alpha of Caldenmore came to see her off himself. He was not a man given to ceremony, and this was not ceremony. It was 2 people who had spent a decade working alongside each other, standing in a courtyard in the first snow, saying the things that needed to be said before a departure made them impossible. "You built something here," he said. "I know," she said. "Thank you for letting me." He looked at her for a moment with the particular expression of someone who has watched a person grow from a frightened girl into someone worth being proud of, and does not quite have the words for it. He nodded once. That was enough. She embraced him briefly, something she had never done before, something she suspected she would not have been able to do a month ago. And then she stepped back and turned toward the horses. Aldric was already mounted. He had said his farewells to the household earlier, with the formal courtesy of a visiting alpha concluding a stay. He had not rushed her. He had not watched the passage, or mentioned the snow, or said anything at all about timing. He had simply been ready when she was. She mounted. They rode out of the courtyard together, and through the outer gates, and onto the road that led toward the mountains. Behind her, Caldenmore settled back into its ordinary morning, the sounds of it familiar and constant, unchanged by her leaving. She did not look back, not because it had been a bad life, because it had been a life, and she had lived it, and it was finished now in the way that things finish when something truer comes along to replace them. The passage rose ahead of them through the snow-dusted rock, narrow in places, cold, the kind of path that asks something of you before it lets you through. She had come through it once before, in the other direction, at 16 years old, in a carriage she had not chosen, toward a life she had not chosen, with the particular silence of someone who has decided not to cry. She rode through it now on her own horse, beside a man who had spent 10 years trying to reach the other side of it, with the particular quiet of someone who has finished deciding and is simply moving in the direction of the decision. Aldric did not speak. Neither did she. There was nothing left to say that the choice had not already said. At the highest point of the passage, where the path opened briefly before descending toward the eastern territories, she slowed without entirely stopping and looked out at the view. The valley below, the distant tree line, the pale winter sky stretched out ahead of them like something that had been waiting. Aldric slowed beside her. They sat there for a moment, side by side, looking at what came next. Then she rode on. And he rode with her. Thank you so much for being here until the very end. If this story stayed with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. I truly love hearing from you. And if you want more stories, subscribe, be part of my library. A new story is always waiting. I'll see you in the next one.